Good afternoon. This is Cliff Russell with WJZZ's Detroit Renaissance News. Coleman Young has announced this afternoon the laying off of 907 city employees in an effort to ease the city's budget deficit by approximately $16 million. Among those being laid off are 182 Detroit General Hospital workers, 26 firefighters, and 400 police officers. The mayor says the layoffs will take effect next Monday. Record high prices for foreign oil and a surge in automobile imports helped push the U.S. trade deficit $2.4 billion.
But I said to you that the system isn't designed to work either. And I said to you that you're a mere functionary, you're a cog in the wheel, and I should add quickly, so are the judges, so are the police, so are the wardens, and all across the board, we're all little functionaries. We're cogs in a wheel that isn't designed to turn forward, and that at best will just spin in place. We can't begin to address the problems of the society we live in by dealing in the criminal justice system. By the time they get to us, it's too late.
I like to organize things. I like to make things, take an idea and then make it happen. I particularly like ideas, not like socialism. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you can see something complete. Socialism sort of takes forever, apparently.
But as a Marxist, or pure Marxist, the assumption would be obviously anti-capital.
No, anti-private property. What I'm concerned with, when I find myself as a Marxist, I'll say it very, succinctly. What I mean is that the central process in this or any other society is the economic process, the process of organizing production to meet the needs of the people. Okay? I'm saying that under a Marxist government, if you will, we would be seeking to organize the process of production to meet the needs of the people who do the producing and not to benefit those who, in the name of private property, own and control the means of production and get profit. Now, what that translates into running a city, I mean, becomes very complicated. You're talking about, in effect, an oasis of socialism in a gigantic sea, if you will, an island of socialism in a sea of capitalism.
Detroit is the only major American city with elected socialists in local government. Ken Cockrell, Sheila Murphy, and Justin Ravitz have a long political history. In the 1960s, Sheila Murphy was one of the leaders of Ad Hoc, a civil rights group organizing against police brutality. Ken Cockrell was active in Drum, the insurgent workers group that fought racism in the auto plants and unions. Ravitz was part of the Motor City Labor League, an organization that helped coordinate the activities of many radicals. Ravitz and Cockrell began practicing law together, winning a string of well-known criminal cases. Banking on public recognition of Cockrell and Ravitz, the radical community decided to broaden their attack on the power structure by running candidates for public office. In 1972, Ravitz was elected judge on the criminal court bench. In 1977, Cockrell campaigned for and won a seat as city councilman on the Detroit Common Council. Cockrell ran 7th in a field of 9, the only person elected to the city council without the endorsement of the UAW or the Democratic Party. Both campaigns were managed by Sheila Murphy, who is now the chief of staff in the Cockrell Council office.
We're not running to educate, we run to win and educate. If we can't win, it doesn't make a bit of sense to run somebody. It costs too much money, and more than that, it costs too much energy and time, and you tie up, too many people. Because if you do it, you got to do it right. And for us, that means, since we don't have a ton of money, mobilizing large numbers of people, which really stretches your infrastructure. You know, I mean, your people, your key people really get pushed hard. If you're trying to, as we did in Ken's general election, we had 800 people in the streets. And you got to feed and get literature to and just generally be responsible for and take care of 800 people between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m., you know, throughout the entire city of Detroit. That's a lot of effort. It takes money, and we can't do that. Winning helps, you know. I mean, it's part of our mystique is that we win.
Socialism has been part of Detroit politics for many years. In the 1920s and 30s, many socialists were among those working to unionize the auto plants. The Ruther brothers and other organizers of the UAW were socialists. Despite the auto company's continuing opposition, the late 30s saw many socialist-inspired reforms enacted into law, providing new protections for working people. With the 1940s came federal laws blocking socialists from union leadership. But the radical heritage of this period gives Detroit an unusual political character.
Welcome the mayor in his annual visit to us to present the budget and, in effect, the state of the city as well as a projection for the future.
The budget I brought to this table for your consideration a year ago was stretched to the limit. As you will recall, I described it to you as a budget that took a highly optimistic view of our potential revenues. We do have a balanced budget, to be sure, but it's a budget balanced with $40 million of revenue items which will require action by either the state or the federal legislatures, and to that extent are entirely beyond our control. It is no exaggeration to say that the sum of our solutions do not seem likely to equal the sum of our problems. How did we get into this situation at a time when things seem to be going so well? How can we be so cash poor when we are surrounded by hundreds of millions of dollars worth of new construction?
In the 1950s, Detroit's tax base steadily declined. Normal migration to the suburbs became a stampede. Of a population near 2 million, 500,000 whites fled. For every 2 businesses that could be convinced to stay, 20 moved on. The burdens of Detroit's decline were felt most by poor people who couldn't leave. In 1967, the city experienced what the federal government called a civil disturbance. In Detroit, this disturbance is remembered as the Great Rebellion. It was stopped with the largest military force ever assembled in the United States against citizens.
We will not endure violence. It will not be tolerated. This nation will do whatever it is necessary to do to suppress and to punish those who engage in it.
According to the Commission on Civil Disorders, the military often used their force with little discretion, firing at snipers that never could be found. At the end of the week that began on July 23, 1967, 43 people were dead.
We've come a long way in our city, from a few years back being regarded as the murder capital of the world to the city that is now seen as the model to which you go if you're interested in urban revitalization. Urban revitalization that is essentially keyed to an elaborate combination of schemes that marry the public sector and its powers of licensing, taxation, regulation, zoning, and so on, marries those powers and subordinates those powers to the interest of enhancing the profit-making potential of various private entrepreneurs. We do it with tax abatements, we do it with tax increment financing, we do it with the bond schemes, or the upscale, educated, affluent young types who really can make a contribution to the tax base being brought back to eat quiche while the poor are taxed out of their homes.
To stem Detroit's continuing decline, Mayor Coleman Young has combined private developers with federal grants to nurse a building boom to life in the downtown area. This strategy has become controversial. Many citizens argue that the developments do not create lasting solutions to unemployment, that they often displace poor people for corporations and the wealthy, and that they receive unnecessary tax breaks. In opposition to these development policies, Murphy, Ravitz, and Cockrell joined with other Detroit activists to form DARE, the Detroit Alliance for a Rational Economy, a group organizing around economic issues.
Okay, Cockrell fights tax breaks. Detroit Councilman Kenneth V. Cockrell is starting his most ambitious attack against city tax breaks for large corporations by picking as his targets two of Detroit's biggest developers, Max Fisher and A. Alfred Taubman. Cockrell, backed by an organization called DARE, hopes to build political pressure that will keep the city council from granting a tax break estimated at $12 million for Riverfront West, a $224 million riverfront apartment and condominium complex Taubman and Fisher proposed to build west of the Joe Louis Arena. A flyer prepared for the petition drive declares, "Tax Max and his pal Al."
The line is drawn in some very basic ways with the administration, and it's going to get a little heavy, and I think we need to be clear about that, and we need to be really clear that this petition campaign cannot not succeed. And when I say succeed, I mean we have got to produce between 15,000 and 20,000 signatures. And I think we can do it.
Okay, well, let me tell you what's happening, okay? They got all this land down by the river from Joe Louis Arena all the way up.
Right, no. All I want you to do is sign this petition. We're sending these petitions to the city council to tell them that the citizens of Detroit do not like their tax money being given away for luxury apartments.
No petition without my lawyer.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
We got people being laid off from the different departments, and people like Max Fisher are coming in and saying they shouldn't have to pay taxes. If you want to look this over and you give us your signature, that might help. Give us your zip too, and maybe we can let you know when there's going to be a hearing at the City County building and get some folks down there.
What I think we can do is build a mobilized community. I want to say it that way, because part of that is building a mass-based community organization named DARE. But it also means building with other organizations, people who may not join DARE, who may not have DARE's politics, who may, be opposed to DARE's politics, but being part of the creation of a context wherein people become increasingly convinced that they should and have the ability to make many more of the decisions about their lives. The conference that DARE is sponsoring has, I think, a number of objectives. The information that we have found that we think is vital for people to have is around the economic development strategy that is being employed by the economic elite and the city government. It's a strategy that doesn't lend itself to particularly interesting presentation in the sense of a meeting or a classroom. One of the things that we came up with was a bus tour.
There were about 400 of them, and they were just people from all walks of life who happened to live in Detroit. Their primary interest is their own welfare in the decade ahead, hence the title of the conference, City Life in the 80s. They say they are just as vitally interested in Detroit's renaissance as city leaders. They are concerned that the term may be too narrowly defined to downtown development and the interests of those responsible for that development. DARE organizer Sheila Murphy says it's primarily a question of what direction the future will take.
That the currently set down directions appear to be set down for the interests of people with, high economic interest, the economic elite, and that regular people in the neighborhoods of cities, poor people, working people, the people who get laid off from Chryslers, as opposed to Mr. Iacocca and folks like that the strategies aren't there for their interests.
The ultimate goal of DARE is to ensure that Detroit's renaissance reaches beyond tall buildings, tax bases, and the interests of the wealthy, to ensure that it reaches out to embrace the needs of all the people in the city. I'm Ron Trumlett, TV2 Eyewitness News in Detroit.
The first and most important thing is that downtown is engaging in what's called a renaissance. And that renaissance has been highly touted and publicized all over the world as Detroit coming back. We think it's an important development, but we want to call people's attention to a couple things. First, A great deal of that renaissance is being based on the use of taxpayers' money. Very little of the money that actually you're going to see in these various projects comes up from private capital. If the money comes up and invested by private capital, it is generally guaranteed through some kind of federal loan or housing grant. Second, the thing that's important to keep in mind is the process. That is, a series of organizations have been established in part with city government officials on them, in part with corporation executives on them, and they are responsible for the construction of the various projects that we're going to see. Literally what's happening is we're seeing the carving out of an area with a great deal of taxpayers' money, primarily for the benefit of business. Now, we're not against the development of downtown Detroit, and we're not opposed to progress. But we are opposed to the use of things like the Community Development Block Funds, which are money which is designated by the federal government for use in the communities to pay for low and moderate income housing, for community development facilities, and a number of other things in the areas and neighborhoods where we live. The Renaissance Center was basically constructed with private capital. Over $120 million was put up by the Ford Motor Company. 2 new towers are being constructed on the Renaissance Center, and they're being constructed by the Rockefeller Investment Corporation. Those 2 new towers are being constructed under a special program which allows for the construction of those towers to receive a property tax abatement, a loss of $7 million. When asked whether they would build the construction if they didn't get the tax break, they said yes, they would still build it. It would still be profitable to them to build those 2 towers if they didn't get the tax break, but they got the tax break anyway by the city council on a vote of 7-2. Now, it had the bus slow down a little bit. This area here is the area for Riverfront West. Riverfront West is one of the key projects of the downtown area. The river will be sealed off from public access. They're building a seawall with urban development money to stop any boats also from coming in. Despite the fact they have all these other grants, they want to ask the city of Detroit to give up property taxes for 12 years to pay for that new building. Again, these apartments are going to go for between $500 to $650 a month a bedroom. We think it's kind of outrageous that on top of all the other government programs and all the other grants that they have, that they're going to, hit it to the city again for some more tax write-off. And we're trying to organize the people of Detroit through the petition drives, etc., to put pressure on the city council so they don't get that tax abatement.
On the one hand, we're real close to observing the backroom deals that are cut between the politicians and the real wealthy capitalists. And we see that with the Downtown Development Authority. We see that with the Economic Growth Council. We see that with Riverfront West and the tax deals that they're making. And juxtaposed against that is the cutting edge of those things that are scarring the public. And that's just real obvious in terms of declining city services, in terms of hunger, in terms of inadequate housing, in terms of the costs of urban renewal to the people who are displaced by General Motors wanting to bring about a renaissance and promote their gentrification program. So it used to be that we were involved in ways that were outsiders protesting and being visible, but essentially around different hits here and there. Each month there might be something else that was real important, but it didn't have the sort of continuity and the sort of linkage that it possesses now.
An application for a tax break by business has never been denied by the Detroit City Council. At this session, the council will vote on their willingness to hold hearings on a proposed tax abatement for the Riverfront West apartment project.
Number 5 would stand on its own. You're either for tax abatement or you're against tax abatement. Now that's why it needs to be... Can we get...
Yeah, Kenny's right. Mr. Kuhn made it quite clear yesterday that without the tax abatement, the Taubman Company will not do it. So vote what you want to do.
So what we want is a resolution where council members can express for or against tax abatement.
With reference to Riverfront West, I'm opposed to it because I see a difference between the city government attempting to participate in the overall pot on a federal level on something other than a random lottery basis, and a private entrepreneur coming to city government, a city government that has laid people off, a city government that is consistently being asked to cut essentially in quality of life affecting areas. And to have us come in and say, on the one hand, you want us to get into this federal pot and give Max et al. Some money, and then come back and ask us, in addition, to express ourselves favorably on a 12-year tax abatement for the improvements to that piece of real estate, is, I think, reprehensible. I have not voted for the tax abatements. I have been opposed consistently to the tax abatements where there is not an affirmative showing of the need for the abatement as an inducement for the investment. I don't think that that burden has been met or satisfied here. We laid off in January in departments such as Consumer Affairs, in departments such as the Health Department, in departments such as Parks and Recreation, in quality of life affecting departments, environmental protection and maintenance. We are laying off people in those areas that including fire, public protection. But we find these industrialists continually coming to us and asking us to subsidize their economic expansion, which has the effect of increasing the demand on the local governmental unit for public services. If I've got more industrial activity going on in Detroit, then that means I'm going to need more police, I'm going to need more fire, I'm going to need more water, I'm going to need more services that I'm asking really to like subsidize my development by abating the taxes and thus reducing their ability to provide me the services that I need in the first place.
We will move to A5.
Councilman Hood, a resolution presupposing support for a tax abatement for Riverfront West Residential Development Phase 1.
There's a roll call requested on this, Councilman Hood.
Madam President, I move the adoption of the resolution.
Okay, roll call requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Councilman Cleveland.
Aye.
Councilman Cockrell.
No.
Councilman Eberhard.
Aye.
Councilman Hood.
Aye.
Councilman Kelly.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mahaffey.
Aye.
Councilman McFadden.
Aye.
Madam President,
Aye.
there are 7 yeas and 1 nay.
Who won, man?
Go on. Gotta keep pushing. If you don't push it, it won't fall.
What we have with Ken on the council is, one, an opportunity to put forward, as he does, I think, extremely well, a socialist or a left critique of the current set of arrangements. By having the power, in the sense, of the position, it lends legitimacy to the idea of a socialist. I mean, there's no, people don't have any experience with socialists having power. It's sort of like, you know, the eccentric cousin, or the, you know, it's something off to the side. And for, I think he's been there now a little better than a year. He has not fundamentally compromised political or personal principles, and they basically, I guess I would venture, are synonymous. We have made a consistent left critique of administration policies, and we are now beginning to see some public debate, discussion, and tying up of these issues that I know didn't exist before Ken was on the council. Tax abatements are being given away in the city wholesalely since 1974.
Politicians and activists can debate issues of zoning and taxation, but have no control over the decisions of the privately owned auto industry. The expansion of the industry into multinational status has hit the city hard. Scores of factory buildings stand vacant, testimony to the jobs lost in the last 2 decades. Nationwide, 200,000 auto workers are on indefinite layoff, and in Detroit, unemployment is officially at 13%.
Line 11. Just give me your card, sir. Give it to him when you get to the window, sir. Line 11.
The industry is facing unprecedented challenges. Energy shortages and new pollution control laws are forcing the industry to produce more efficient autos. Competition from imports require the industry to increase productivity, and in the USA, the industry is approaching market saturation. There is now almost one auto for every 2 people, so continued expansion of sales must be found elsewhere. The automaker's solution for these challenges is the world car, a car that can be produced from parts made in plants in several different countries. If the workforce of one plant goes on strike, the world car can be assembled elsewhere with parts made from plants in other countries.
Ford, when I was there, General Motors, Chrysler, all over the world. We pit Ohio versus Michigan. We pit Canada versus the U.S. We get outright grants and subsidies in Spain, in Mexico, in Brazil. All kinds of grants. Well, I'm not going to theorize, but I've had great experience in this. I have played Spain versus France and England so long, I'm tired of it. And I play the states against each other here. You could give a litany of these kinds of things.
35% of the autos sold in the United States are produced in Detroit and Michigan, but the strategy of the automakers means this percentage will continue to decline.
All right.
The courtroom reflects the suffering and frustration which result from urban economic crisis. Justin Ravitz has worked as a judge in Detroit's criminal court for 8 years. He administers the laws of the state as he sees fit, and his decisions have seldom been reversed. State law prohibits filming in court.
I never harbored an ounce of desire or ambition to be a judge. I'm sure that Ken never used to dream that someday he would be a city council member. But it's been real important for us to do battle with those who still very much dominate by cutting into their power and by dealing on a daily basis with the real importance of those positions. I'd say pardon the mess, except it's neater than usual.
Hi, Alan. How you doing?
So thousands of people come through one courtroom that I occupy each day. And decisions that I make in there are important to them individually. They're exposed to a person who maybe, most of the people had heard of previously as a socialist, and they might have thought I had horns, and they come in court and see that I don't. One's in a position to try to affect the institution in a way that'll have greater impact than just the impact upon individual cases in one's own courtroom. That's a real different perspective, I think, than most other judges hold.
Ravitz has become well known for making the atmosphere in his courtroom less intimidating. He refused to wear the traditional robes until the Michigan Supreme Court passed the Ravitz rule, requiring judges to wear the robe in the courtroom. Ravitz requires that the entire court stand for the jury rather than for himself.
It gets a little clumsy to stand for the jury when they're first coming in, but after we've selected a jury and I've excused and thanked the rest of the panel, then the jury usually goes into the jury room for the first time, unless it's been a prolonged jury selection process. And then when we call them out in order to begin opening statements, I first ask that everyone please rise. And everybody rises for the jury, and it's really often funny. The jury will come in, and more often than not, the jurors will all be standing there, and we'll be standing looking at one another, and I'll sort of smile and say, we're standing out of respect for you, and as soon as you wish to be seated, we'll be seated also. And sometimes remark that we often stand here looking at one another for a very long period of time. But that's not, an act. That's an important representation to this jury of what we think of them, a cross-section of our community, taking time out of their busy individual lives to come down here and decide something of the greatest importance to all of us.
I guess I was one of the people within law enforcement in Detroit who did not anticipate a massive social revolution growing out of his ascendancy to the bench. I knew Ravitz and his cohorts, Cockrell, Ted Spearman, Jeff Taft, as all being, you know, radical leftist lawyers, but pretty careful legal scholars. And I felt that with that kind of a background in the law, they probably had a leg up, or Justin had a leg up on some of the judges over there who I don't feel know the law at all.
He is a good trial judge. He's fair to both sides. He works hard. He's very meticulous about the law. And on that score, I'd have to give him a good rating. The only thing is that he doesn't move the cases as quickly as we would like him to. The reason for that is because he is meticulous and he does not really have the administrative mind. He's more of the legal mind. So when you're moving 30,000 cases a year, you also judge a judge by how well he can move the cases.
I think most of them who came in were surprised at his age because he was a young jurist. And I think they were surprised in a sense because a lot of times he had repeaters, and they were surprised that he might let them make a phone call or asked us to make a phone call for them. Or he might take time to sit down and talk with them personally, although they might be incarcerated. He'd sit down and listen to them, and I think that really surprised them.
I think people feel comfortable there, whether they are not college trained or even high school graduates, that he is going to make them understand, and if he does not, he will not allow a case to proceed until they do. I think that's important, that sometimes defendants and witnesses are not totally aware of what it's about in that courtroom, and they should know.
You see, one of the things that frightened the law enforcement system about Ravitz and his cohorts is that the thrust of their argument, their attack, if you will, on the establishment was aimed at the most visible part of the establishment, which was the police, you know, quite candidly. So Ravitz wasn't a Marxist taking the bench. Ravitz was an anti-police communist who was going to take every opportunity to score the police at every turn in the road. In other words, nothing the police were going to do was going to be right. And obviously, since that hasn't happened, it probably hasn't changed a lot of minds, but it made the issue kind of go away as an issue. I quite frankly have heard rank-and-file police officers say that they would rather appear before Ravitz simply because they feel that he knows the law and he knows how to apply the law in the court, and that he's consistent.
When you were an attorney, you were always conscious of the points you wanted to score and the defenses you wanted to maintain. When you're a judge, you have to put yourself in the mind frame of a juror, saying this person doesn't know any more than that which they have elicited. And you have to think of two things. You have to think of, one, what hasn't been brought out that's really important, and two, how can I go about bringing it out that won't be prejudicial? And sometimes when you think it's inherently prejudicial to one side or the other, you call counsel to sidebar and you say, look, this is an area that you just haven't covered, and it's darn important, and I want it covered, and I'm going to cover it myself if you don't, in fairness to the jury. But it'd be preferable if you did so that I don't interject that way. There are situations where some days the courtroom's full and people are interested, and there are days where someone will go to trial on what could even be a capital case where they might go up for life or something, and there's no one in the courtroom. Nobody there, not a single human being there who would like evince even a presence to show some concern about that person's fate. And that's, you know, a really depressing, must be an awfully lonely, horrifying situation. It's an institution that inherent in it is a ton of sadness. When you have massive poverty, and we do in this country, there are 25 million people living in poverty, And you have all the materialism that is heaped upon us. Just look at the ads that we're all subjected to from day one, around the clock, and, you know, billboard. I mean, it's relentless. The materialism, the violence, and all those things, that's a breeding ground for crime. That's why we can call the society and the system itself criminogenic. And what they do is, one, they manufacture criminals, like they manufacture cars.
I would think it would be a very difficult position to be in, to be a Marxist, an avowed Marxist judge in a capitalistic society with what I would have to view and he would have to view as capitalistic laws. I don't think that's cognitively a very comfortable position for him to be in. And I'm really rather surprised that he's lasted 6 years.
Who are you employed by? My ability to cope with this job is directly proportional to the way in which things are going that transcend this limited work. Like work that, you know, I'm sort of engaged in terms of trying to deal with the heroin problem and get it at a higher level so we see the real criminals, the profiteers brought in here rather than the addicts. And if that's going good, that gives me inspiration and makes the rest of this something that I can handle a lot more comfortably, you know, and a lot better, I suspect. And beyond the institution, you know, their work. And when those sorts of political activities are going well, that gives one the strength and sustenance and the outside support that you need.
There are 27,000 vacant buildings in Detroit. Many of these buildings are usable structures for which there are no tenants and no money for renovation. Others have been abandoned by their owners. Every Friday, the City Council meets to decide which buildings will be demolished as health and safety hazards. The city has no other alternative than destruction of its own assets.
Is there anyone here on item G8, 9, 10, 11, or 12? There's no one here on items G8 through 12. We will concur in the recommendation of the department. There's someone here on item G13, 8239 Olympia. Mr. Poquet.
(8239 Olympia) is a 1.5-story frame, single dwelling. Building's open to trespass. It appears that repairs are not economically feasible. Taxes are due an amount of $381. We recommend demolition.
Yes, sir. Would you identify yourself?
My name is Patrick Stevens. I live at 2505 Iroquois. The house in question belongs to my 89-year-old mother-in-law. Used to live there. The last tenant, when they moved out, demolished the home as they moved out, and we have a tenant who's ready to move in as soon as it's fixed up sufficiently so that if someone is living there, we can fix up the balance of the house. It's a 2-flat house. Okay. It's a matter of having someone there. Every time we do something, it's torn out. I don't know how many times we boarded it up. I imagine we spent $1,000 in the last year just boarding it up and having it torn back down.
We'll give you 2 weeks to board it up, and as you know from being here, if you can keep it boarded, there'll be no problem.
Thank you
good
very
luck
much.
in
Thank
fixing
you
it
very
up.
much. Thank you. Items G14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Is there anyone here on those items?
When I moved here, there was a house there. There's 2 houses stood there on that vacant lot. And That lot was vacant when I moved in here. There was a house there next to the house that's burned now. And over there was 3 houses. And that's a triple lot there. 3 houses stood there. 2 was here.
We had had a series of fires down this way in the Chaos Corridor. The neighborhood there got rough. The apartment itself got kind of hard. People that had some means or some way of trying to get out, they would move their families out. And that's when, you know, we got some fires were started in there, and it just was a process. You could see it coming. You could see it coming. The building just became unsafe.
20 blocks from that gutted apartment building is General Motors World Headquarters. This is the largest manufacturing corporation in the world. In 1978, GM earned $9 million in profit every day. GM is located in the New Center area of Detroit, 10 minutes from downtown. Once, rows of neat working-class and middle-class houses surrounded the GM building. Although the New Center neighborhood still houses 4,000 residents, many of the homes are run down. GM has bought up all the properties, closing off the streets and building a modern and protected suburb within the city. Opponents of the project see it as gentrification, the driving out of low-income residents and bringing in of well-off professionals. The community met with General Motors executives and city officials at a public meeting to discuss the New Center project.
There's really no housing problem in Detroit in terms of available houses that people could live in. There's a problem of persuading people to live in them. There's a problem of having the people have enough money to keep them in good shape so that they can move into them. One of the byproducts is that some people are going to have to move, which is a very disrupting thing, which we want to minimize. We certainly don't want to move them out of Detroit. Our intention is to stabilize the area, and we hope that some of the people can move back into the area and stay there.
This community does not like anything that General Motors has done up to now. That's number one phase. Principally because you do not identify with the community. You don't identify with the whites nor the blacks in that neighborhood. And one of the principal problems is why you're not having success and why people came out here tonight, because they don't respect the way that you're managing this project.
Why do you have to own all the property before you can contribute a penny to the revitalization and the growth and the development of this city? And then I refuse to believe that that little area of land that you talked about is all that GM has designs on. So I want to know, are there some long-range revitalization plans that we don't know about at this point? Like, are you going to go to Virginia Park and leave Euclid, which we know as Rat Row, okay? You're going to leave all that the way it is and come in and build these multi-million-dollar shopping centers and homes and everything else and not go any further than that? I want to know if the people across Virginia Park need to be concerned about what may be happening or what might be showing up on General Motors drawing boards. And I want to know why, before they can contribute anything to the growth of this city, they have to own it.
The properties are being optioned, purchased, may I finish? Renovated and resold right back. The people who are in them have the first right to purchase them.
A man and his family, which is a low-income area, be able to move back into this area and pay $40,000 for a house. Now you tell me, how is he going to do this?
I'm happy to see a corporation like General Motors willing to stand up and take some heat to try and do something for the city. You know, back again when I joined New Detroit, everybody was leaving Detroit. People were hitting 8 Mile Road and they weren't looking back. Corporations were moving their headquarters and their offices. General Motors is not only staying in their headquarters in the New Center area, they've cleaned up around it, and now they want to try and reach out and do some things in their community.
I'm glad you offered me an opportunity to talk. What you have going on in the city of Detroit is a coalition
And it's talked about quite a lot, and everyone's very proud of that, except those people who are being screwed by the coalition. The coalition is said to be this marvelous amalgam, this joining together of the so-called private sector, and that would include, for purposes of illustration, General Motors, and the public sector, and that would be the mayor, and in some instances, certainly the majority of the Detroit City Council. What has happened in city government is that a lot of the responsibility for making decisions in city government has effectively been taken from the legislative branch, us, and from the executive branch, and have basically been transferred through things like some of these coalition organizations that I could name, but the initials might not mean anything for you. How many have heard of DDA, Downtown Development Authority? Not very many, some have. How many have heard of EDC, Economic Development Corporation? How many have heard of Economic Growth Corporation? How many have heard of many of these initial agencies that have a number of development schemes that are taking money and resources from poor people and using them to make profit for private entrepreneurs? But I'm not here to attack GM, because every time I sat at the council and someone came from the neighborhood, they said they supported the revitalization that General Motors has underway. And I support that revitalization. Let's be clear on that. The question then and now was, what will be the terms on which this revitalization will take place? I'm concerned that there be relocation for those who will be displaced as a result of the project, first of all. I am concerned that those individuals who are desirous of continuing to occupy the geography in this area be given the right to do so. I see subsidized housing as being a key to whether or not, in fact, people will be able to move back in here. And the solution to those problems don't necessarily lie in our standing up here and barber-shopping on each other and barber-shopping on these cats. I mean, they got jobs. They paid to be here. They're paid, they're paid to take this heat, and we should be very clear on that, you know? I mean, General Motors is what they are and will always be. The rationale of business, and everybody say the business of business is business. It has been and will continue to be until such time as there is a form of political organization that gives this society another reason to organize economic resources, other than making profit, but to meet the needs of the people. We haven't reached that state. And that's a state we've got to reach, because all of the problems that we face in housing, healthcare, transportation, and so on, flow from the fact that we, as working people, have no control at all over investment decisions that are made in this country.
I'd be delighted to sign your son's autograph. Do I have my own pen? What's your name?
I think this is Cobo Hall. I didn't know who you were.
Hey, how you doing? What's your... Everybody, how you doing? We're going to win in the end, brother.
You already have.
No, not yet. Not until we get something done about what they're talking about here. Take good care. Take care of your moms. Take care of your moms. Yeah.
I saw a lot of city people around the building, so they may not have did well.
Yeah, they were doing workshops, like Malcolm Day was supposed, there a number of city people had different workshops, I guess. Malcolm was supposed to do one on coalition politics.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to have that in mind.
And we are not going to elect our way to liberation in this society. I mean, that's just, I don't think that that's the central place where power is going to be taken. Secondly, when people control investment decision-making is when people have economic power, which is when people have are then really controlling the society. And as long as we don't control investment decisions, we are not, in that sense, in power. And one of the most important things that we have to do in the electoral arena is be very clear about the kind of power that we do have and not get confused about the nature of the power that we hold.
Apart from screening cases more carefully, so you more often really do represent the best interests of the people of the state of Michigan, apart from trying to do what you can to climb the ladder and get those who really are engaged in heroin trafficking, to go after white-collar criminals, to alter the dynamic that does exist, that's led to your image and in the view that the public has of prosecutors. I think that prosecutors have been victimized by the process that has occurred historically and by the image that you're all burdened by, and I genuinely believe that it can be stood on its head. I genuinely believe that we can have people's prosecutors who really do represent the best interests of the community. Just as I believe we can have people's police officers, just as I believe that we can have or could have a prison system that dealt not just with warehousing and dehumanizing people, but dealt with trying to build a better society for a better future. Those are my comments to you, and I would welcome any questions or comments that you might wish to make.
Well, aren't you advocating that we superimpose our own value system and what we think are priorities, as opposed to doing what the law says to do?
There's nothing wrong
if
with
they
having a value system. And everyone ought to have a value system and ought to be able to stand up and defend it and fight for it. And part of the trouble is we've established some weird notion of neutrality. I'm not neutral on rape, nor are you. I'm not neutral on murder. I'm not neutral on heroin trafficking. Those things are bad. And in the process, we'd also train prosecutors to have a different projection that jurors would be affected by also, where you're not on the defensive, where you can stand up and be proud of what you're representing. Neutrality isn't cool at all, to my mind, nor just, nor fair, nor anything else, when the proper human reaction ought to be non-neutrality. Yes, I think you should impose your values, and yes, I think your values ought to reflect those of the people of the state of Michigan, the real people.
The point is, I don't think that everyone, the council represents the community, and I know that the community is constituted of disparate elements. We're not of one voice. I'm a socialist, they are not. You've got feminists and every other strain, like on the council. So for me, the task is to call it the way I see it and try to make as reasoned an argument in support of a position that I take as I can make, and hope that it will have some persuasive effect on my colleagues, but I have to rely primarily on our ability to organize outside. So DARE becomes important to me, the Detroit Alliance for Rational Economy, because the way we change the council is to organize a constituency out there that insists that its politics be reflected on the council, and that might mean some change, you see. So my job is really outside, too, and maybe we can change this council. So I'm optimistic. There was a time when it would have been unheard of for someone like me to be here, and if the mayor had it his way, I wouldn't be here, because I was not on the slate.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. We're back in session, Marianne?
Back in session, those are voting.
Make contact now, make contact.
Because people are from here, are committed to the city, we're not going to turn it over to the old line economic elite or ruling class in this town. We're just not going to give it up. They don't own it, really and fundamentally. The people who built it, who are the lifeblood of the city, own this city. And sooner or later, we're going to take it back.